Hello, everybody. Can you guys hear me good? Awesome. All right, so we're gonna talk on time today, and you guys know I like to play with the words, so I spell talk as a T-O-K. No sponsorship from TikTok for this video. Just want to throw that disclaimer out. So let's start off. Question for the audience: can anybody tell me what time is it? And coach, it's not game time, but can anyone else tell me what time it is?
Now.
Huh? Now, that's a good answer. So it is now, but in case somebody would have said, I don't know, what is it right now?
7:53.
Clock says 7:53. This is here. In New York, it's 10:53. Somewhere else in the world, it's 11:53, and so on and so forth. But anywhere that you're at, whether that's here or over there, it's always going to be now. So the time we're in is now, and the place we're in is here. So here, we're going to tie that back in later, but I wanted to start off with that. So starting off right here. I'm going to reference about 4 works. And if anybody wants to talk to me after, again, caveat real quick. This is not so much that I'm giving you guys a lecture. This is more I'm taking the perspective of a student. And I'm studying these things. So if anybody wants to have this conversation afterwards, this is meant to elicit the thoughts in your head. And we can build afterwards. So one of the first ones that I'm going to go off of is if you go online, there's a little lesson put together by KRS-One. It's called The Power of Future. Is anybody familiar with that?
I'm familiar with KRS-One.
Not with The Power of Future?
Maybe.
All right, so you guys want to check that out. So
Why don't you just wrap it for tonight?
another hour for that. So for the Power of Future, the whole premise of the talk, of the lesson, is that a future is your vision, what you're seeing, something that's going to happen. And if you look at the etymology of future, it comes from a futurus, which means about to be. So when we look at the future can be seen of or thought of as the realm of imagination. Because anything that we're imagining, anything we're seeing in our mind, even though it hasn't happened yet, in the present, we're experiencing it. And through neuroscience, which I'm going to get into it, but anyone's familiar with Joe Dispenza, with hypnosis as well. And anytime you get into that state, your mind cannot tell the difference between something that's experienced and something that's real. So even though we're experiencing something that hasn't happened yet, our body can actually respond presently as if we've already had that experience through emotions. But so the reason I bring this up is I want to make the correlation between the past as being our memories, right? Because anything that we have a reference for is in our memories, but that's something that's in the past. And with this work as well, you'll see that whenever we stay anchored to our memories, say we wake up in the morning, first thing we want to do is grab our phone, want to check our social media. Maybe not everybody here has social media. Maybe you're checking your text messages. You get up, you see your pictures hanging on the wall. All these things are reminding us of who we were in the past. So past is memory. Future is imagination, and then the present moment now, that's being. That's us, what we're being right now. So slight right there. We're going to move into the next part, and I want to tell you guys a story. Do we have any Naruto fans here? No Naruto fans? All right, that's fine. Nobody's going to get that one. So we'll go to the next one. So the way that this story starts off is there's 2 little girls being born. Any birthday, if you guys, we'll shout out to the Leos. They're both born July, we'll say 24th. So they were born about 20 years ago, and they've been living their lives. They have a certain sense of what reality is. And I'm going to pause real quick. So I was supposed to say before that. So we all know that whatever happened in the past affects the future, right? Because whatever has happened has led us to where we're at today. Does everybody agree with that? Anybody conject or disagree? What about, does anybody think that the future can affect the past? Yes. Okay, cool. Thank you. So the reason I bring this story up is because 20 years later, they end up finding out that the girls got mixed up when they were born. So they lived their whole lives having this paradigm and this idea of what they think their reality is, only to find information in the future, and this past that they thought they had is not the reality that was, real or what they were actually experiencing. So I have that example. And I'll use one more story. So this one is a story about a being that grows up its life thinking that it's separate from God, from its creator, only to one day look in the mirror and to realize that what they're seeing is, messing up. Yeah, they're basically the universe unraveling or developing itself. So the reason I bring that story up is because this being that doesn't know that it's one with the universe and ends up realizing it's one with the universe is all of us here today. Because I believe at some point we feel like maybe we get lost off of our path or whatever we think we're supposed to be doing in life. But we need to remember that we are one with everything, and we're going to move forward into our next topic. So just to touch base real quick, talk about memory as the past, imagination as the future, and then we gave an example about how something in the future can affect time in the past. All right. For our next part, I want to talk about time. I'm not going to get too much into the etymology, but one example, do we have any Spanish speakers here? Right? What's Spanish? What's the Spanish word for time? Tiempo. Tiempo. What does tiempo sound like? Another English word. Tempo. Tempo has to do with music. So from time and tempo, we know that it has to do with some kind of sound or some kind of repetition. We get words like temporary. We get words like temporal, and then tempo that we just had right now. So we get repetition, and one of the things that repeats itself, we have a specific word for that in English. It's called a cycle, right? Cycles repeat themselves. So when we get into the word cycle, we're going to go into two things real quick. One, just want to make the reference to Hertz waves. Anybody familiar with solfeggio frequencies? Yeah? Right? So with Hertz, you have, it's like a sine wave, and it will repeat itself. When it's slower, it's going to, the lower the Hertz, it's going to have a slower frequency. The higher the Hertz, it's going to have a faster frequency, so it's going to repeat itself. So cycle, we're making the connection to sound again, right? Because we're now and we're here, right? Here also has to do with sound. So making that connection. So besides the Hertz, solfeggio frequencies, we also are going to touch into astrology real quick. So before I get into astrology, I know there's a couple people here talking about morality that are familiar with Mark Passio's work, right? I know a lot of you know about the trivium. Does anybody not know about the quadrivium? You don't know about the quadrivium? Anybody else doesn't know about the quadrivium? We're going to touch on the quadrivium real quick. So the trivium has to do with language. I'm not going to talk about that. It's another talk. We're in the quadrivium. We're dealing with numbers, right? So basically, quadrivium, it's a four-way path. So the first thing that we're looking at is numbers, right? Just the way numbers work in general. So if we look at 0, 0 would be the void. Nothing exists, but the potential of everything exists in the void. Then we get into the 1, right? And when we talk about the 1, if I say God, it's giving my brain a word to try to explain something that I want to maybe convey to somebody else. The problem is when we use a word like God, is we're creating an object out of God. So now if God is an object, God is over there now. Even though I gave God a word, God is over there now. So now there's a separation between me and God. So now it contradicts the idea of 1 in the first place, right? Then we get to 2. 2 is the duality, right? We have our opposites, our polarities. 3 is like considered one of the first real numbers, or it's the first real number because it has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and so on and so on. That's numbers, right? The second part of numbers we're going to deal with is going to be numbers in space, and that's dealing with our geometry. We have our 2-dimensional figures. We have our triangles, circles, squares. We get into 3 dimensions. We have our platonic solids, our cube, our octahedron, isosahedron, dodecahedron, tetrahedron, and did I miss one? Dodecahedron. So space, right? Numbers in space. After the third part of the quadrivium is going to be music, and music deals with numbers in time. So the reason that it's important to know about geometry first is because since we're talking about time, right? We have our tempo, and we know that we can divide notes. We can divide a whole note into like half notes, into quarter notes, eighth notes, depending on the time signature that you're using, right? So the reason I bring that up is because with the hertz, depending on the hertz that you're using, you can get one of those geometric patterns that we see with numbers in space, and that's where the cymatics comes in, right? So we see cycles in time, producing the hertz, which is also time, right? Because it's a repetition, and that's giving us these sound patterns. And then we're in the here and now. Okay? Another one, too, is getting into astrology. The reason I bring astrology up is because in the quadrivium, numbers in space, numbers in time, and then astrology, or in space, would be the way numbers function in space and time. So a lot of the geometric patterns that we see with cymatics, a lot of the harmonics and things we see in music is the same things that the planets are doing in the sky, right? So the reason I bring this up as well is as far as the way that we keep time, when we look at our clock takes minutes, seconds, and it takes hours. Hours is going to be related to Horus. Horus is the sun god in Egypt, right? So the way that, the other thing too is how many zodiac signs are there? 12. Right? How many numbers are there on a clock? 12, right? Because as we're going through the day, we spend 2 hours in each sign, and we go around. That's where we get our 24, right? That's where the clock comes from. And if we look at the sun, last time I was here, has everybody, when we think about the sun, has everybody seen like a sine wave or thought of like a sine wave for the sun's pattern for the year? Is anybody not familiar with that? I'll start you guys off real quick. I'm gonna go quick. So we start off at Aries. Right? It's at equilibrium. So I got like a line right here. Or do I have a line somewhere? I'll just do it right here. So I have like this equilibrium line. I got Aries right here. We're going to come up to summer where we're here in Cancer. Right? And then the crab moves funky. It looks like it's moving backwards. So when it gets to its highest point, now the sun's going to start dipping down. Right? Then it's going to hit the middle point again. And before it goes down, it's going to reach equilibrium again. That's where you get Libra. It's bringing balance again to the season, right? Then we get to the bottom. We're going to get into Capricorn, and goats like to climb mountains. So the sun's going to start climbing again, and then it gets into Aries, and that repeats, right? If we see the moon, I don't know if we can, where the hell the moon's hiding right now. But the moon, that's another cycle that's going to repeat. Starts off as a new moon, goes to a crescent, quarter moon, and then a gibbous, and then it's a full moon. And then it goes back in backwards order to a new moon, and then it repeats itself. So the cycles, we're seeing cycles again, right? And when we look at time, it looks like time is moving linear and time is moving forward. But there's a couple of phenomena that actually do happen in astrology. And one of the first ones is going to be planetary retrograde. Everybody here is familiar with things go bad, Mercury retrograde, exes start hitting you up, things like that. All right, so with retrograde, the thing about a retrograde is a planet looks like it's going backwards in the sky. And I have like a little piece of paper. I didn't draw it that good, but if you look at the sun and Venus, they end up forming a pattern in the sky called the kiss of Venus. Anybody familiar with the kiss of Venus? No? Nobody's familiar with that? I know Ignacio is. But basically what happens is for every 13 years on Venus and 8 years on Earth, they end up doing a dance in the sky, and they end up, 13 minus 8 is 5, and you end up getting like a 5 petaled flower that they end up forming in the sky. And then you'll see that same pattern looking at the solfeggio frequencies with cymatics, right? So we're seeing the space and the time and the astrology in the sky. Time moving forward, but the retrograde is going backwards, right? There's another one that's big that they said it had to do with the Mayan calendar and everything. Precession of the equinoxes, right? With the precession of the equinoxes, the zodiac signs are actually moving backwards instead of moving forwards. So like right now we're in what are we in right now? We're in Cancer. The next sign is going to be Leo, but the precession that's happening or that the energy we're experiencing right now supposed to be from Pisces going backwards into Aquarius. So even though like us with our time and the way we keep time, we're looking at planets moving forward, we're already seeing two phenomena astrologically of planets moving backwards, right? And I'm going to have a third one right here with astrology as well. Anybody familiar with the lunar nodes and eclipses, the way eclipses work? All right, so real quick, we have the north node and the south node, right, with the moon. And that's kind of like the north and south pole on the moon. And they're always going to be on opposite signs. So last year in December, we had an eclipse in Sagittarius. So for about a 1.5 year period, we had eclipses. They were happening in Sagittarius and in Gemini. Sometimes, rarely, it will happen in one of the what do you call it, the neighboring signs, but it's usually going to be all of them in the north and south node. So we just had Sagittarius and Gemini, and we just had a switch this year. So does anybody know what's the next sign after Sagittarius? Capricorn, right? What about what's the next sign after Gemini? Cancer, right? So that means if it's moving forward this year, we should have our eclipses in Cancer and in Capricorn. But we move backwards. We just had April and May. So at the end of April, while the sun was in Taurus, right? We had two eclipses. So the sun's in Taurus 2 times in the month. Once you're going to have the moon in Taurus, and you're going to have the moon in Scorpio. Those are the opposite signs. So what happened was at the end of April, we had the first eclipse. I believe that one was when the moon was in Taurus. And then exactly 2 weeks later, we had the other eclipse, which was when the moon was in Scorpio. So for this year, when the eclipses are happening, the next time there's going to be an eclipse is going to be when the sun is in Scorpio. So we're going to, if anybody wants a fact check after, it's going to be about, I think, one in October, one in November. It's going to happen the same way. So now when the sun is in the opposite sign, Scorpio, once the moon is going to be in Scorpio, and once the moon is going to be in Taurus. And when those two alignments happen, that's when we're going to get the eclipse. So the reason I bring this up, giving you the small lesson or the short lesson on the astrology, is because we look at the planets, and that's how we keep time with our hours and how we're going through the year. But yet we're seeing 3 cases astrologically where things are going backwards. So is time going forward or is time going backwards? Okay. Last thing I'm going to leave you guys with is, let's see. We made the connection with cymatics, the connection with the here and the now. Let me make sure anything before I move to my last point. Now that's everything right there. So the last thing I'm going to end you guys with is going to be from this book right here. It's from Dr. Joe Dispenza. It's the Becoming Supernatural. He also has something called The Formula. And on The Formula, in lesson, one of the lessons about the future, he talks about the future. He talks about the 3rd dimension and the 5th dimension, right? So with the 3rd dimension, we think about, the way we experience time is through space. So for example, if I'm at one point of consciousness, which can be like me standing here, and after I give my presentation, I want to go to my car and grab something. I have to move from this point of consciousness to that point of consciousness. Or in other words, for me to experience time, I have to move through space. And in this 3-dimensional reality, what we have is an unlimited space. We can go through space, but time is linear, right? So when we get into the 5th dimension, or this dimension of 3D reality, we can call it space-time. And then we can call the 5th dimension as time-space. And some of the things are going to change between the two. You'll notice that when you're dealing with 3D, you have infinite space. But when you're dealing with 5D, you have infinite time. In other words, there is no past, there is no future, and there is no present. If anybody's ever gotten into like a deep state of meditation, you'll know that you lose track of your body, you lose track of space, and you lose track of time. You don't even know what time it is. You end up on the meditation as somebody else on the other side. But, there is no now, there is no future. And us talking about like the mind and the imagination, right? We can experience the future in the present. So just leading off this as well, another thing that factors into the way that we deal with time is distance. Anybody that likes math, we know the formula for distance is a speed over time. So like with relativity, they say that the faster you're moving, the slower time seems to be moving. So we're dealing with speed and time. However, when we're in like that 5th dimensional reality, there is no distance. So every like possibility of time is going on at once. And what else do I want to say?
Where you want to be in 1 second.
Exactly.
Where you want to be?
Let me see.
Right here.
Yeah.
Here and now, right?
Last thing, so time is linear, but if we experience it like in a 5th dimensional reality, or basically this reality is we're experiencing it with our senses, and then this other reality we're experiencing it with our awareness. And right here, time has to be linear, because that's how we move through an infinite space. But in an infinite time, there is no past, present, and future. Everything's happening all at once. So I'm going to leave you guys with just one thing, and then we'll open it up to questions, which would be us talking about time and music and sound and how all these things are correlated. Can music be played backwards? I'll just leave that. Any questions? Preguntas, no? I got one right there.
Green language.
Yes, sir.
The word temple. Does
Yes.
that relate to sounds as well? Does that give us like kind of a clue
tempo.
to the nature of how these buildings
Tempo?
function?
It might, because like you can
Temple,
pronounce that
temple.
like temple with like very subtle on the L.
Yes.
You could. After this, we gotta check. We'll hook up on the internet. We'll check out the etymology for temple. I need to add that one to this.
Cool.
Yeah.
So where do you go to find these etymological breakdowns? Do you have resources for that?
You mean like how I came up with this, or?
Just how to break down words. Is there a resource you use to?
There's dictionary.
Yes.
You need two things. You need a lot of time and attention, and sometimes you need luck, where you don't need to spend that much time looking through things. Oxford Dictionary is really good at looking for roots and root words. Also, like recognizing like the knowing multiple languages, right? Because like I use the Spanish example. I'm not too fluent in many other languages. I'm sure there's probably a word in another language that starts like with the T and P. I could have made the connection right there, but just me knowing Spanish, that was the first word that came to mind.
Tempura.
XM Online, XMTYM Online.
Yeah, that one's
I use
good.
that all the time. That guy does a lot of good research.
Yeah, that one's good. You can also, I think, on LibGen, I've seen a couple versions of the English Oxford Dictionary as well. Get that for free. Did Isaac have his hand up? Nope. All right, cool. All right, thank you guys for your time and attention. Have a good one.
The sweater break?
Yeah.
Yeah.